Imagine two singers walking into your house, and 20 minutes in, you can't take your eyes off them, not realizing that they are your own flesh and blood. That happened to a king once, and it's how the Ramayana actually ends. Sage Valmiki had just finished writing the longest poem in human history, 24,000 verses, six massive books, the entire destiny of a dynasty bound in palm leaf and ink. But Valmiki was not happy. He wanted one impossible thing. He wanted this song to live in human hearts, not rot on dry palm leaves in some forgotten library. He looked at the pile. He despaired. Who on this earth could carry 24,000 verses out into the world? He didn't know it yet, but the answer was already walking toward his hermitage. 1,000 miles away, a king sat on a throne that had everything. A throne of gold, three brothers who would die for him, an empire so peaceful that the harvests sang. His name was Rama, and the two boys he had never met, boys who carried his own face, were about to walk into his court and sing his story back to him. He had no idea they existed. They had no idea who their father was. Valmiki had no idea yet that he was about to introduce them. Two boys in hermit robes walked into Valmiki's clearing. They touched his feet. They had no idea they were princes. Valmiki saw them, and his breath caught. These were not ordinary forest children. Their voices could bend the wind. They could charm the celestial Gandharvas in their sky cities. But that was not what stopped Valmiki cold. They looked exactly like two reflections of one original man. They were walking, breathing copies of an emperor, and they lived on roots and berries. Therefore, Valmiki's search was over. He chose them, he taught them, he drilled the entire epic into their memory word for word. By the end of their training, they had become the living voice of the epic itself. The first audience was the hardest one. Forest sages, scholars who had memorized the Vedas since they were 6, men who would catch a single mispronounced vowel from 50 feet away. If the boys missed one syllable, the song would die in that clearing. Kusha struck the first chord. Lava raised his voice. These were men who had spent 40 years training themselves to feel nothing. They did not weep at weddings. They did not weep at funerals. They had outlived their own families and not wept. One verse, two verses, three. And then the eyes of every single sage in that clearing overspread with tears. Splendid, they whispered when their voices came back. Old men who had buried emotion for half a century were openly weeping at the feet of two boys who didn't know whose story they were telling. This song, one of them said, will be the food of every poet who comes after us. They gave what they had, a water vessel, a jute robe, a black deerskin. Hermits with nothing in the world emptied their hands. The song could not stay in one forest. So the boys took it with them, first to neighboring hermitages, then to villages on the great roads, then to towns. Wherever Kusha and Lavva stopped to perform, crowds gathered before the second verse and refused to leave before the last. Pilgrims wept. Children sat still for hours. Therefore, the boys traveled further. They sang in the courtyards of pious houses. They sang at the gates of small kingdoms. They sang on riverbanks and at temple steps. And one bright morning, the road they were walking carried them through the gates of Ayodhya itself. They walked into the main avenue. Rava struck a chord. Kusha began to sing. And the king of Ayodhya was on that avenue. Returning from a state procession, mounted high on his great royal elephant, surrounded by his guard, Rama heard a melody he had never heard before. He listened, not for a verse, not for a chorus, for the entire song. When the boys reached the last note, the king did something that surprised even his own ministers. He spoke directly to the two singers from atop the elephant. "Come with me," he said. "You will sing this song again in my own court." He did not know he had just invited his own sons home. The palace doors opened. Two boys in hermit robes walked into the most magnificent room on the subcontinent. The king turned to his brothers. "I heard them on the avenue," he said, "and I could not let the rest of you go without hearing this." He looked down at the boys. Something moved in his face that he could not yet name. All he knew was that he wanted to hear the song again. "Let this ballad be heard from these resplendent brothers," he commanded. The brothers tuned their string, cleared their throat. The first note arrived. Rama leaned forward on his throne and smiled, quietly, almost to himself. "These two saint-like boys carry kingly features," he remarked, "and yet they live as hermits." And the boys began to sing of a young prince walking through a forest, of a great bow notched in a far-off kingdom, of an exile that became a war, and a war that became a homecoming. Rama on his throne listened to his own life sung back to him by two voices he could not yet name, and then he truly looked at them. Right there on the golden throne, the Emperor of Ayodhya saw what every minister had been too polite to mention. He was listening to his sons. He had every right to interrupt. He had every right to rise. But the song was the only thing in the room more powerful than the crown. And the king of Ayodhya, for the first time in his entire reign, chose to be just a listener.
Most retellings of the Ramayana end at the coronation. The hero comes home, the kingdom rejoices, the credits roll. Valmiki did not end his epic there. He ended it in this room. A king on a throne, two boys he had never met, a song he himself had invited in from the avenue, and the precise moment a man who had killed demons and split oceans understood that the greatest story he had ever lived was being sung to him by his own children. This is what the elders meant when they said the song would be the food of every poet who came after, not only because it was beautiful, because for the first time, a story became the bridge that carried a father back to his sons. The first time the listener and the storyteller turned out to be the same family. So here is the question this video promised to answer. A manuscript of 24,000 verses crossed the threshold of the most guarded palace in the world. No soldier lifted a sword because the messenger was never made of paper. It was made of two voices and a melody that even a king's discipline could not refuse. Every story has a beginning. The Ramayana has two. If this is the first time you have heard the story of Lav and Kusha walking into Rama's court, comment new below. I want to know how many of us grew up with the shorter version. If you already knew it, comment wonder if you have ever recognized someone in your life you should have known long before you did. Subscribe. Episode 2 is called Ayodhya. It is what happens after the song ends, the Ramayana's second beginning.